Let's start with something simple. Imagine you have a shield. That shield has protected your house for years. Every time someone throws a rock at your window, the shield catches it before it hits the glass. You feel safe. You invest more money into that shield. You train people to operate it. You tell everyone around you that your house is protected. Now imagine that the person throwing the rocks figures out a new trick. Instead of throwing one rock at a time, they throw a rock that breaks into 30 smaller rocks the moment your shield reaches it. Your shield catches the big rock, but the 30 smaller ones scatter in every direction and land all around your house. Some hit windows, some hit the roof, some land in your yard and stay there, dangerous, waiting. It is not a fictional scenario. That is what happened over Israel in March 2025. What changed in this war is not the number of missiles being fired. What changed is what those missiles are doing when they get close enough. And to understand why that matters, you need to understand a few basic things about how missile defense actually works and why the system that was supposed to stop these attacks was built for a different kind of threat. Let's go back to the beginning. Israel has one of the most advanced missile defense systems in the world. Most people have heard of the Iron Dome, but the Iron Dome is actually just one part of a much larger system that operates in layers like floors of a building. Each layer handles a different type of threat at a different distance from the ground. The lowest floor is the Iron Dome. It is designed to catch short-range rockets and missiles, the kind that travel relatively slowly and follow a predictable path. It calculates where the incoming rocket is going, fires an interceptor, and destroys it in the air. It has worked well against the kind of rockets fired from Gaza or Lebanon over many years. The middle floor is called David's Sling. It handles medium-range threats, missiles that travel farther and faster than what the Iron Dome is built to catch. The top floor is the Arrow system. This is built for the hardest targets, ballistic missiles that travel outside the atmosphere and come back down at tremendous speed. These are the kind of missiles that Iran has been using. Arrow is specifically designed to detect a missile coming from far away, calculate its path through space, and destroy it before it re-enters the lower atmosphere. The entire system works on one basic assumption. Each incoming missile follows a path that can be calculated. If you know where it started, how fast it is traveling, and what angle it is moving at, you can predict exactly where it will be in 30 seconds, in 20 seconds, in 10. You fire your interceptor to meet it at that predicted point. Missile destroyed. Threat neutralized. That assumption held for a long time. And then Iran changed the weapon. Here is the first change. Iran has been using missiles that do not fly in a straight, predictable line. The kind of missile Iran has been firing recently is called a maneuvering re-entry vehicle. In plain language, that means the missile can shift its direction while it is falling toward the ground. Give a person jumping from a tall building and being able to lean left or right while falling to land somewhere different than where you predicted. Israel's defense systems were built to hit a target that falls straight down in a calculable arc. They were not built to handle something that adjusts its direction mid-fall. The second change is speed. Iran has been using missiles that travel at what is called hypersonic speed. The word hypersonic means 5 times the speed of sound or faster. Sound travels at roughly 340 meters per second. 5 times that is 1,700 meters per second. Some of the missiles Iran has been using travel at 8, 10, even 15 times the speed of sound during re-entry. That is not a little bit faster. That is so fast that from the moment a defense radar spots the incoming missile to the moment it hits the ground, there is almost no time to respond. You are trying to intercept something that is moving the length of a football field every fraction of a second. Now here's the third change, and this is the one that changes everything else. Iran has been loading many of its missiles not with a single explosive, but with cluster munitions. Most people do not know what cluster munitions are, so let's explain this clearly. A standard missile carries one big explosive. When the missile hits its target, that one explosive detonates. It causes damage in the area around the impact. If your defense system destroys the missile in the air, the threat is over. That is the clean, simple version of how a missile defense system is supposed to work. Fire the interceptor. Destroy the incoming weapon. Everyone below is safe. A cluster munition works differently. The missile itself is like a container. Inside, it carries dozens of smaller explosives called bomblets or submunitions. The missile is designed so that at a certain altitude, the container breaks open. All those smaller explosives scatter outward in different directions, like seeds from a pod. Each one of those smaller explosives then falls to the ground separately and detonates on impact. One missile becomes 30, 40, sometimes more individual threats landing across a wide area. Now here's why this matters for defense. Israel's defense systems are designed to destroy the missile, the single large object. The missile opens up and releases its bomblets before the interceptor reaches it, or if the impact of the interceptor causes the casing to break apart. The individual bomblets scatter and no interceptor can chase all of them at once. The defense system did its job in the technical sense. It fired. It hit. But the outcome on the ground is still dozens of smaller explosions spread across a large area. There is an additional problem that gets very little attention. Even when the defense system successfully intercepts a cluster missile, the force of the interception can rupture the outer casing and cause the bomblets inside to be thrown outward by the collision. The defense system operated perfectly by its own measurements. It detected the threat. It fired. It made contact. And yet, the people below still face dozens of falling explosives. The logic of interception, the binary of hit or miss, does not apply to a weapon designed to scatter on impact. The Israeli Defense Forces confirmed this themselves in March 2025. They held a press briefing and disclosed approximately half of all ballistic missiles fired by Iran at Israel since the war began had been carrying cluster munitions. Not a few, not an experiment. Roughly 1 in every 2 missiles. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies, an American research organization, confirmed this finding in a separate analysis published the day after. The conclusion was that Iran deliberately adapted to the situation on the ground. As Israeli and American strikes destroyed some of Iran's missile launch sites, Iran responded by making each remaining missile more destructive. You cannot fire as many missiles. You make each one do the work of many. Let's now look at what actually happened on the ground to understand why this matters beyond military theory. In the town of Yehud, just outside Tel Aviv, 2 workers in construction were killed and a third was severely wounded. They were outside. They had not reached a shelter. The missile that hit near them had been partially intercepted, but the bomblets it released scattered across the area, and those bomblets are what killed and wounded the people on the ground. Near Beit Shemesh, responders arriving after a strike found multiple separate blast zones just meters apart from each other. They were treating wounded people from different impact points simultaneously. That is the signature of cluster munitions. Not a single explosion at one point, but a scattering of smaller explosions across a wide area. And then there is what happened at Beit Shemesh itself, where the most devastating single event of this war took place. An Iranian missile hit a bomb shelter beneath a synagogue. 9 people were killed inside that shelter, including 3 teenage siblings. Israel's defense system fired 2 interceptors at that missile. Both missed. The roof of the shelter collapsed. When you read that story, the instinct is to blame the defense system for failing. But the deeper question is why a defense system that has worked reliably for years is now failing against the kinds of missiles being fired. And the answer takes us to a third piece of Iran's strategy that most coverage has ignored entirely. Iran has not just been trying to land missiles inside Israel, it has been systematically targeting the systems that allow Israel and the United States to see the missiles coming in the first place. Think about how missile defense works at the most basic level. Before you can intercept something, you have to know it is coming. That requires radar. Radar sends out pulses of energy. When those pulses hit an incoming missile, they bounce back and tell you the missile's location, speed, and direction. Your defense computer uses that information to guide an interceptor to the right point in space. Now imagine someone attacks your radar before they fire their missiles. If the radar is damaged or destroyed, you cannot see the incoming threat clearly. You cannot calculate where it will be. Your interceptor is flying blind. This is exactly what Iran has been doing. In the weeks before the most intense missile barrages, Iran fired at American military facilities across the Gulf region. New York Times analyzed satellite images and official statements and identified at least 17 American military facilities that had been damaged by Iranian strikes. 11 of those were military bases. The list includes air bases in Qatar and Kuwait and headquarters of the United States Navy's 5th Fleet in Bahrain. Among the most significant damage was to radar tracking systems, specifically a type of radar used across the region to coordinate ballistic missile defense. Satellite images showed structural damage right next to where one of these radar systems was positioned in the United Arab Emirates. If that damage affected how well the radar could see and communicate, it would have reduced the ability of the entire defense network to track and coordinate responses to incoming missiles. The United States itself admitted it does not have a complete picture of how many Iranian missile launchers are still operational. Senior defense officials told reporters that Iran's ability to damage American facilities went beyond what the planning assumptions had predicted. That is a significant admission. It means the intelligence estimates before the war began were wrong about what Iran could reach and what damage it could do. The cost of damage to the 5th Fleet headquarters alone was estimated at roughly $200 million. At one of the bases, in Kuwait, 6 structures connected to satellite communications were destroyed or damaged. Now connect the sequence of events, and you can see the logic behind it. First, Iran attacked the radar and communication systems that allow the defense network to see incoming missiles and coordinate responses. Then it fired its heaviest, most advanced missiles at Israel's major population centers. The missiles arrived in an environment where the systems meant to stop them were already deployed. The interceptors were flying with less information, less coordination, less certainty about where each threat was heading, and those missiles were not ordinary ballistic missiles. March 10th, 2025, Iran launched what it called the 37th wave of its ongoing operation against Israel. This single wave lasted 3 continuous hours without stopping. It deployed multiple different missile types at the same time, each one calibrated to stress a different part of the defense network. The Fatah missile, which translates roughly as Conqueror, uses a hypersonic glide vehicle. Instead of following the traditional arc of a ballistic missile, going up and coming back down in a predictable curve, it carries a separate vehicle that detaches and glides through the upper atmosphere, adjusting its path as it moves. Defense systems have to predict its location with much less certainty than a missile following a standard arc. The Kabershaken, which means Fortress Buster, is a solid fuel missile. This detail matters. Older liquid fuel missiles require time to load the fuel before launch, which gives surveillance systems a window to detect the preparation and potentially destroy the launcher before it fires. A solid fuel missile is ready to fire much faster. The launch preparation is much harder to detect in time. Multiple other missile types in the same waves carry the cluster warheads described earlier. Large missiles that break open near the target, scatter bombardments across a wide area. 5 different missile systems, fired in overlapping waves across a 12-hour period. Each one designed to challenge a different piece of the defense architecture. Iran claimed this wave struck a satellite communications center south of Tel Aviv, military positions near Tel Aviv, targets in Jerusalem and Haifa, and American military positions in the Kurdish region of Iraq. Iran also claimed it targeted a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier and a destroyer in the Indian Ocean. Those specific claims have not been independently verified. What is verified is the Israeli military's own assessment of what got through. And it is that assessment, coming from Israel's own defense forces, that reveals the scale of what changed. The Israeli military had assessed at the start of the war that Iran held approximately 2,500 ballistic missiles in its stockpile and was producing more every month. Before 2026, Iran had been working to expand that stockpile from roughly 3,000 toward a goal of 8,000 within 2 years. During a shorter conflict in June 2025, Israel destroyed hundreds of Iranian missiles in strikes and disrupted production of roughly 1,500 more by targeting manufacturing sites. Iran began rebuilding immediately. By early March 2026, the United States and Israel were publicly claiming that they had eliminated between 75% and 80% of Iran's active missile launchers. The White House press secretary said that Iranian strikes had dropped 90%. Graphs of daily launch numbers seemed to confirm the story. On the first day of the campaign, roughly 90 missiles had been fired. By day 4, the number had fallen to around 20. By day 6, officials were presenting the declining numbers as proof the campaign was succeeding. But here is what the declining numbers concealed. The number of missiles went down. The size and destructive capacity of each missile went up. Iran was not running out of weapons. It was changing the sequence of its attack. In the early waves, it fired large numbers of smaller missiles to overwhelm the defense network, expose its gaps, and use up its interceptor stockpile. Interceptors are not free. Every time Israel fires one, it has to be replaced. Iran was forcing Israel and the United States to spin down their interceptor supply before the real attack began. Then, once the defense network was stressed and its radar infrastructure had been degraded by attacks on American facilities, Iran shifted to its heaviest, most advanced weapons. Wave 37 was the endpoint of that sequence. 3 hours of the largest missiles in Iran's arsenal, carrying hypersonic glide vehicles, cluster warheads, arriving in a detection environment that had been systematically weakened. 4 days after the White House told the world the threat was 90% gone, Israel experienced the single heaviest bombardment since the war began. The Israeli military's response during this period was substantial. The Israeli Air Force struck targets in Tehran, Isfahan, and Shiraz, including a Special Forces headquarters, a ballistic missile coordination center, and nuclear laboratories. More than 170 munitions were delivered across those cities in a single operation. A surveillance drone destroyed an Iranian missile crew in western Iran while they were preparing to launch. Simultaneously, the United States conducted a preemptive operation in the Strait of Hormuz. Intelligence indicated Iran was preparing to lay naval mines in the waterway. American forces destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels before they could be deployed. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow channel through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil passes. Major shipping companies suspended or rerouted their ships through the region. The economic consequences of even a partial disruption to that waterway extend to fuel prices, supply chains, and energy costs in countries far from the conflict. On the same day as the largest Iranian barrage, Blar opened a second front from Lebanon. Attacks from Lebanese territory added another direction from which Israel's defense systems had to respond simultaneously. Israel struck Hezbollah infrastructure in Lebanon, including targets in Beirut. As of March 10, the civilian toll on the Israeli side stood 14 killed and more than 2,300 wounded to varying degrees. In a single 24-hour period, 2 people were killed in the Tel Aviv area, and approximately 200 were wounded. More than 3,000 people had been displaced from their homes either because of direct hits or because of debris from interceptions falling on residential areas. This last point is worth understanding. When a missile defense system fires an interceptor and successfully destroys an incoming missile, that is counted as a success. But the wreckage of both the missile and the interceptor has to land somewhere. It falls as debris, sometimes carrying pieces of unexploded ordnance over the area below. People have been killed and wounded by interception debris. Property has been destroyed. This is not a failure of the defense system. It is an unavoidable physical consequence of intercepting missiles over populated areas. It simply does not appear in the success statistics. The broader strategic picture at this point in the war looks like this. Iran has demonstrated that it can penetrate Israel's missile defense with enough frequency to cause casualties and displacement on a scale that affects daily life across the country. Schools remain closed. Gathering restrictions are in place. The head of the Israeli military's Home Front Command addressed the country, said plainly that more difficult days are expected. That is not the language of a side that believes the threat is nearly over. Israel and the United States have demonstrated that they can strike deep inside Iran, destroy missile launchers, disrupt production, and hit targets in the capital and in major cities. But Iran has demonstrated that it can rebuild, adapt, and continue developing new capabilities. Claim of 90% reduction in Iranian missile capability was made on March 6th. The largest and most damaging barrage of the entire war came on March 10th. The distance between those two statements is not a rounding error. It is not a failure of communication. It is the actual situation on the ground which is more complicated and more dangerous than any official summary has discussed. Both governments are presenting this conflict in terms of who is winning. Both claim their adversary is weakening. The destruction is real on both sides, but neither government has presented a credible theory for how this ends. Iran has not been defeated into stopping. Israel has not been deterred into accepting the attacks. The American military presence in the region is under pressure. That senior officials admit exceeded their expectations. The weapons involved are not the weapons that existing defense systems were designed to stop. Cluster munitions that scatter into dozens of individual threats. Hypersonic vehicles that change course in mid-flight. Missiles ready to fire in minutes, not hours. Deliberate attacks on the radars and communications that make interception possible in the first place. None of that fits neatly into the narrative of a shield, that hole. And for the civilians in the middle of it, the ones who ran to shelters and found them hit, the ones who were outside when the bomblet scattered, the ones displaced from homes and cities they have lived in their whole lives. The gap between the official narrative and their daily experience is not abstract. What we are watching is not one side dominating the other. What we are watching is a conflict between two militaries adapting to each other in real time, escalating in response to redevelopment, with the civilian population absorbing the consequences of escalation every single day. The question that neither government can currently answer is where that escalation stops. To understand the full weight of that question, consider one more dimension of this conflict that rarely appears in the daily news coverage. Cluster munitions do not only kill and wound people at the moment of impact. A significant percentage of the bomblets that scatter from each missile do not explode on contact with the ground. They sit in fields, on rooftops, in gardens, in playgrounds, unexploded, waiting. They can remain dangerous for years, sometimes decades. A child picks one up when a worker accidentally strikes one with a shovel. When someone steps on one in a field they felt was safe, it detonates. The weapon kills and injures long after the strike that delivered it is forgotten in the news cycle. More than 100 countries around the world recognize this danger and signed an international agreement banning the use of cluster munitions. The agreement exists specifically because of the documented long-term harm these weapons cause to civilian populations after conflicts end. Iran did not sign that agreement. Israel did not sign that agreement. The United States did not sign that agreement. None of the three primary actors in this conflict are bound by the prohibition. That means cluster munitions will continue to be used, and the long-term consequence, the unexploded bomblets that remain in the ground after the war ends, will remain a danger to ordinary people for years. There's also the question of what this conflict reveals about the future of missile defense more broadly. For decades, the model of missile defense that Israel built and that the United States helped finance and develop has been held up as a template. If you invest enough in the technology, if you layer enough defense systems on top of each other, you can make your population safe from missile attack. Israel demonstrated that this model could work. Its defense systems have, over the years, intercepted an extraordinary number of incoming rockets and missiles. What this conflict has revealed is that the model has limits. It was built for specific kinds of threats. When the threat changes, when missiles become faster and less predictable, when warheads are replaced by scattering clusters of bomblets, when the radar infrastructure that supports interception is itself targeted, the assumptions that the entire defense architecture rests on begin to break down. That does not mean missile defense is worthless. It means it is not a complete solution. A shield can slow down an attacker, force them to spend more weapons to achieve the same damage, reduce the overall number of people killed and wounded compared to a world with no defense at all. But a shield is not a guarantee, and presenting it to a population as a guarantee is something. That means the threat is 90% gone when it is not. It's a kind of false confidence that the reality on the ground then shatters in the most painful way possible. The people in the shelters know this already. The first responders treating casualties across scattered blast zones know this already. The families who went to what they believe was a protected shelter and did not come home know this already. The gap between what leaders say in press briefings and what people experience in the streets and the shelters is not a detail at the edge of the story. It is the center of it. Until the official picture and the actual picture move closer together, the people living underneath those missiles have no way to make genuinely informed decisions about their own safety. That is the reality this conflict is made impossible to ignore.